again, I was one of the instructors in hospitality management. I was a culinary instructor, so we knew each other, but we didn't have a tremendous amount of interaction.
And was that true for you for your entire tenure as a teacher? You were in the hospitality division?
Yes, that's correct.
All right.
Now, we shared a number of students. Yeah, we were in different departments.
Okay, but shared students because of the overlap?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so did that relationship with both Nancy and Dan Brophy continue in that manner, or did you become closer to them at all over time?
I'd say it continued in that same manner. At a certain point, and I don't remember exactly how long ago it was, Nancy sold her catering company and began selling insurance. I had left full-time teaching and needed to sign on to Medicare, so we got together to work out a good policy. But we didn't see each other as much. We saw each other quite a bit in the kitchen, but not after that point.
Okay. And so in the maybe last several years, would you say you weren't social friends, more colleagues, or you'd see each other on occasion?
We would see each other when we had business together.
All right. And then what about with Dan Brophy after you sort of not retired, but pulled back in your full-time teaching in 2015? Did you continue to have contact with him?
Yes. The students that Dan had in June of 2018 were students that I was going to take over the following weekend. His class was over the weekend of, it was June 2nd, and then I would be teaching the same group of students the following weekend.
All right. And so can you kind of explain what that looked like for the culinary program? Would that have been a different term or the end of their time there?
It wasn't the end of their time there, it was the end of the class. The weekend program ran on a different schedule than the full-time weekly program because the students were in class Saturday and Sunday. And so depending on how the schedule ran, it would either run for 4 weeks, Saturday and Sunday, or 8 weeks, one of the 2 days.
All right. And you mentioned that it was that weekend was the end of that first part of the program with Chef Brophy. Is that because it was the finals weekend or sort of the end of that term?
It would be the end of that class.
And are you familiar with what that looks like, that last sort of final day or final weekend?
Oh, that would have been T2, I believe, so that would have been a live fire.
And what do you know about what that looks like, kind of the setup or prep for that?
The kitchen would be organized in a slightly different way. The students would have a long stainless steel table perpendicular to the rows of stoves. They would have their food prepped, and they would be handed a ticket, and they would have to produce the food on that ticket and put it on the serving table, and it would be rated by the instructor, both in terms of the presentation and then later in terms of how well they prepared the food.
And are you familiar with, on the instructor's end, what the setup or prep for that morning or that day would look like?
Well, it would really depend on what they planned for the live fire exercise. What recipes, what foods. Sometimes they would do some basic prep ahead of time. Otherwise, first thing in the morning, the chef would pull whatever ingredients were required for the students and have it set up and organized for them when they came in.
And are you familiar specifically with Chef Brophy's routine in the morning and what that would have looked like?
In general, the first instructor in, whether it was Dan or someone else, I would do it when I would be the first one in, is we would fill both the coffee and the water at the students' refreshment center. We would brew the coffee. We had a large kind of plastic dispenser with a pour spout that we would fill with water and ice. And the rest would be depending on what it was he needed for his class.
Okay, so that would be kind of the first steps in the morning, is to get that ready for when the students came in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard because you're remote. We have a map we've been using in the courtroom, but is that station that you're talking about closest to kitchen 1?
Yes, if you come in the student entrance and walk through the student lounge, the first thing on your right would be a classroom, and then there would be the coffee and water station.
All right, and then the kitchen 1 and kitchen 2 would kind of be the next thing?
Yes.
All right. Okay, in addition to your work at the Oregon Culinary Institute, were you also part of an organization called Potluck in the Park?
Yes. For close to 20 years.
And can you tell us sort of what that is and where it's located?
Potluck is a grassroots all-volunteer organization that provides a free meal on Sundays for basically anyone who needed it. There are a lot of people whose paychecks don't stretch to the end of the month. There are other people who are on the street. There's no means test. All you had to do was show up and you would be fed. The Potluck in the Park kitchen was on Jefferson, kitty corner to OCI. It was on 18th, 17th and Jefferson, on kind of the opposite corner, not directly across the street, but kitty corner.
Okay, and so would that be on the same side of Jefferson as where the Starbucks was, but across 17th?
Yes.
All right.
Right on the corner.
Okay. And are you familiar where some of the vans from Potluck in the Park would be parked at various times?
There was a loading dock on the 17th Street side, and generally they would pull in there.
Okay. All right. And did Potluck in the Park have overlap or at least connection to the Oregon Culinary Institute?
Yes. For a long time, I would collect food. For example, if the students were doing knife drills, there would be all kinds of vegetables cut. If they made soups, they sometimes wouldn't want to take it all home, so we would put it in containers or plastic bags, and we would have it on what we call a donation shelf. And on Thursdays, some of the Potluck volunteers from Christchurch, we had a number of supporting organizations, would come and pick it up and turn those leftovers into soups and casseroles.
All right. And what was your role with Potluck in the Park?
I was a member of the board and one of the volunteers.
All right. I want to talk specifically about the morning of June 2nd of 2018. Do you remember that morning? All right. And do you recall where you were that morning? Were you at Potluck in the Park or somewhere else?
I was at home.
And at some point, were you notified about something going on downtown?
Yes. I received a phone call from David Utzinger, who is kind of the lead volunteer at Potluck. And he said he had been contacted by the people working, the volunteers working in the Potluck kitchen, to warn him that he might not be able to park the van. On Saturday mornings, he would generally do a bunch of gleaning stops. There are a number of supermarkets that would provide us with food every week. And they told him that there were police and police tape everywhere, and someone told them that someone had been shot at OCI. So David, knowing that I worked there, called me and asked if I knew what had happened.
And had you heard anything prior to that phone call?
Nothing.
And do you remember roughly what time that would have been in the morning?
It would have been somewhere between 9:30 and 9:45.
All right. And given that phone call and that information, what did you do?
Well, the first thing I thought about was, I knew Dan was teaching, and I thought maybe he could tell me what had happened. So I tried calling his cell phone. All of the faculty have phone numbers for other faculty members, and it went to his voicemail. So I thought, well, I wonder if Nancy's heard anything. So I called her on her cell phone. And I explained what had happened and asked her if she'd heard anything. And she said, she kind of laughed and she says, no, you know Dan. He would never call me. I'd have to wait until he came home to find out what happened. And I think we spoke probably for a couple of minutes. And she said, I'm going to try to call him. I'll call you right. So she called me back and said, no, she couldn't reach him either. He wasn't picking up. And again, we talked for another minute or two of, speculating a bit. And she said, I think I'm going to go down there and see if I can find out what happened.
And were those the only two phone calls you had, or do you remember if you exchanged a couple different calls that morning with Nancy?
There might have been one more. We were kind of trading calls back and forth.
And do you remember about what time that was?
I think the last time I talked to her was a few minutes after 10.
10 in the morning. Was that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I think just the connection occasionally is slow. All right, and so she told you she thought she might head down there?
Correct.
Okay. And did you have any further conversation with Nancy Brophy that day or about the incident?
Not with Nancy, no.
And you didn't talk to her in the days following or anything like that?
I think I left her a message a day or two after, just to say if she needed anything, please let me know. If she wanted to talk, let me know. She texted me a message back saying thanks. She'd let me know if she did anything, but she was pretty overwhelmed.
All right. And it sounds like you at least still were in communication enough with Nancy at that point to have her personal cell phone number?
Oh, yes. It hadn't changed in a long time.
Okay. And prior to that morning of June 2nd, had you talked to Nancy or Dan regularly, or what had that communication been like?
I wouldn't say regularly. In getting ready to teach the following weekend, I came into OCI a couple of times that week, and I saw him, and we exchanged greetings, but nothing of significance.
In your relationship and friendship with either Nancy or Dan Brophy, did you talk to them ever about personal details of their relationship, their financial circumstances, anything like that?
We never discussed finances, but and this was, how can I explain this? Nancy always was Dan's biggest cheerleader and biggest defender. Um, she liked to explain his sense of humor to other people because it was very dry. And she always told little stories about how good things were.
And so, did she ever talk to you about having financial difficulties or problems in that area?
No,
Did she ever talk to you, or did Dan ever talk to you about owning firearms or anything related to firearms?
no.
Um, and did you ever talk to Dan in your work communications or when you would see him about his plans for the future, for retirement, or anything of that nature?
To Dan, no.
And sorry to jump backwards a bit, going back to that phone call, those series of phone calls with Nancy on June 2nd, when you called her to notify her about what was going on at the school, did you specifically tell her that you'd heard someone had been shot?
I did. I repeated what David had told me. But none of us knew if it was a street person, if it was a student. I don't think it occurred to me that it would be Dan.
Understood. So the information you received in the phone call was just that somebody was shot and you did not know how they were associated.
Right. And it wasn't even that specific. It was someone on the street told us that someone had been shot. So we didn't even know if that was accurate or not.
And in your sort of long history with the Brophies and with Nancy Brophy specifically, did you know much about Nancy's writing or some of the books that she'd written?
I didn't read any of the books or the short stories, but we used to laugh about it in the kitchen. Uh, Bodice rippers are kind of not my thing. Uh, and I asked her one time, how do you think of all that stuff? And she says, oh, you read other people's books, you do research. She really enjoyed writing.
And did she ever talk to you about what she was working on or what she was working on in recent years?
You mean the specifics of the books?
Yes, or any of her writings.
No.
All right, thank you very much. That's all the questions I have for you at this time.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Maxfield. I think we've met. Isn't that true?
I believe we did meet once, yes.
Yes. And I'm one of Ms. Brophy's lawyers. You said that morning on June 2nd, you had tried to call Dan at the Oregon Culinary Institute. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
You called his personal cell number.
Yes.
Why didn't you try to reach him at some kind of a phone that would be inside OCI?
Oh, that wouldn't have worked. The only phones in that part of the school were in the office, which was locked on the weekends. It was only open when the restaurant was open, and you wouldn't even hear it ringing anywhere else in the building.
So the only way to really make contact with Dan that morning would be to call his personal cell.
Right.
I want to play for you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 221 and ask you to listen to that if you would.
Dan, it's Maxine. I just saw the news alert. Do you know what happened? Was it one of the students? I was just on my way down there when I got the news. When you get a chance, let me know what's happening, okay? You've got my number.
You recall leaving that message?
Could I listen to that again, please?
Dan, it's Maxine. I just saw the news alert. Do you know what happened? Was it one of the students? I was just on my way down there when I got the news. When you get a chance, let me know what's happening, okay? You've got my number.
Okay, yeah.
Were you able to hear that?
Yes, I did.
And was that the voicemail that you left for Dan Brophy on the morning of June 2nd?
Yes, that sounds like that. That was.
And that's the call that you made to Dan before you called Nancy Brophy, is that right?
Yes.
And I think you'd mentioned that you first found out about this because David Otzinger at Potluck in the Park had contacted you to see if you couldn't help them arrange to get the van in and out of that area.
He wasn't asking me for help. He was basically asking me if I knew what had happened.
Okay. In that voice message, you mentioned a news alert. Do you recall now whether you might have heard something on the news before you called Nancy Brophy?
You know, we have an alert system that was used, for example, to announce snow days or emergencies. And it sounds like that was what went out about perhaps something like classes being canceled, because that was the system that was used.
Okay, but you refer to it when you're talking to Mr. Brophy as a quote news alert. Is that your shorthand for that system?
I think it probably would have been.
Okay.
That's what it sounds like to me.
Right. And when you talked with Ms. Brophy later, might you have used the same phrase that you'd heard a news alert?
I don't recall that. I do recall telling her about David Utzinger's phone call.
I want to talk to you briefly about your conversation that followed, the one you had with Ms. Brophy. You said that when you called her that her first response to the news that you shared was that Dan was at the school.
Yes.
And then she told you she
And
was.
that's when I told her that I knew that he was, and I had tried to call him and just got his voicemail.
And Ms. Brophy told you at that point that she was going to try to reach him.
Yes.
And then she said she would call you back.
Yes.
My co-counsel is telling me that I'm looking away from you because I'm looking at the screen and that I should be looking this way. Can you see me better now?
I can.
I'm sorry. I let you talk to the back of my head. All right, so Ms. Brophy told you that she would then contact her husband. Is that right?
Yes.
And did she call you back a little soon after that to let you know that she had tried to reach Dan?
Yes.
Okay. You talked about a statement that she made, something to the effect of, you know, Dan, he won't call me. I won't know anything until he comes home at the end of the day. Was
Yes.
that about what she said?
Yes.
When she said that, did that ring true to you, knowing what you know about Dan Brophy?
Absolutely.
When Dan Brophy was at work, was he just kind of focused on his instructor duties as opposed to any interactions with family members?
Absolutely. Yes, very much so.
Was he the kind of guy who, even if he was getting a call from his wife, he might just continue to do the work that he was doing rather than to take the call or return the call?
Yes.
You talked about potluck in the park and that for a time you were able to get donated food from the Oregon Culinary Institute to provide for these meals that you serve to people in need.
Yes, that's correct.
And how many years did that happen, that you were able to get the food for potluck in the park from your connection with
Oh,
the
it
chef?
was several years, 2 or 3 at least.
Did there come a time that that ended?
It did.
When did that end?
Uh, Dan's mother and father had been operating a retreat in Thailand. And when they returned to Portland, Dan's father began working with one of the soup kitchens downtown. And at that point, food on the donation shelf would disappear, and I wasn't sure where it went, so I asked one of the other faculty members, and they said, oh yeah, Dan and his dad came down early in the morning and picked it up and took it to his soup kitchen.
Did there come a time that you had a conversation with Dan Brophy in which you tried to negotiate how that food might be split up?
I did. Basically, I said, you know, we were serving the same population. Why don't we just divvy up the week? And we would take half for potluck, and his dad would take half for his soup kitchen. And I thought we had an agreement. And I told him that the potluck volunteers would come on Thursday to pick up the food. And on Thursday, the food would be there. On Wednesday, Thursday, it would be gone.
From time to time, did you have conversations with Nancy Brophy in which maybe you not so much complained, but groused a little bit about Dan Brophy?
I tried not to, but probably once or twice. I mean, I don't think it's fair necessarily to complain to one spouse about another spouse.
Okay. But if you did grouse a bit about Dan, or maybe you were present when other people did, how did Nancy Brophy react?
Oh, she always was his greatest defender. She always defended him. She always came up with a reason that he was okay. Always.
You said you'd known Nancy Brophy for decades. Would that be fair?
About 30 years.
And in fact, you got your job, the job that you had teaching, at the suggestion of Ms. Brophy. Is that right?
That's correct. I had let my circle of friends know that, since catering is extremely physical, and I was getting a bit on in years, I wanted to stay in hospitality, but do something that perhaps wasn't quite as strenuous. And so I got a call one day from Nancy saying that the school, which at that time was converting from Western Culinary to Le Cordon Bleu, was looking at setting up a hospitality management program, and they were looking for instructors. And she encouraged me to apply.
You did, and you got the job. Is that right?
Good.
Okay. And for a time,
In fact, I was hired on this. I was hired on the spot. As a matter of fact.
that's the low stress interview. So for a period of time, you and Dan Brophy were working together at Western Culinary Institute. Is that right?
And I think at that time it had switched very quickly to Le Cordon Bleu.
Okay. Do you know whether Dan Brophy had been terminated from Western while you were there?
Objection, Your Honor.
I did hear that had happened, but nobody would.
Ms. Borcherdine, when one of the sides says objection, just hold off answering for a minute till I can rule on the objection. What's the basis of the objection?
Relevance, Your Honor.
Defense.
Does the court want a talking relevance response?
Yes. Would you like? Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, the state has presented evidence that Chef Brophy had an unusually good relationship with his students, and that he got along with all of his students. And I think the fact that he'd been terminated from Western for issues with a student would be relevant.
I'm going to have the jury step out for just one moment.
All rise for the jury. And Judge, I will leave the record open. Nope, you're gonna go all the way down, just like everyone else. Nope, all the way back down to your jury room.
All right, everyone can have a seat, and now that the door is closed, does the state have any response to that?
I do, Your Honor. I would continue my relevance objection. I would also say that depending on Ms. Borcherding's knowledge, it's hearsay as to what happened or what the underlying circumstances were. And so I don't think it comes in under either of those prongs.
All right, so one of the reasons I wanted to have the jury step out is the evidence thus far, as I've understood it, is that most of the people who have testified, well, not most, but at least half of them were pastry students who didn't have much of a relationship with Chef Brophy. There were several that were culinary students that had a instructor-student relationship that was decent. So I might see the relevance, but I'm not sure about the whole hearsay issue since I don't know what she's going to say. So why don't we, by means of an offer of proof, if you could, Ms. Maxfield, ask some questions so I understand the basis of her knowledge of what she's going to say.
Thank you. Ms. Borcherding, while you were at Western Culinary Institute, you and Dan Brophy were working colleagues, is that right?
That's correct.
And at some point, Mr. Brophy lost his job at Western Culinary?
Yes, that's what I understand.
And you understood that he lost his job just generally over an issue with a student?
That is what I was told.
And is that something you were told by other administrators?
Oh boy, you're going back a long way. I honestly do not remember.
Do you remember actually advocating for Dan Brophy over his removal and asking?
No.
No? Okay. Do you know whether his termination had followed a prior incident in which there had been an issue with a student?
I honestly do not know.
Okay. That would be my proffer, Your Honor.
All right, I'm gonna sustain the objection based on the hearsay portion of the objection. It sounds like the witness's knowledge of this incident was information relayed to her by another person. What that means for you, Ms. Borcherding, is when the jury comes back, I'm going to tell them I sustain the objection, and then you'll be asked a different question, and we'll just go from there. Yeah.
And Your Honor, before the jury comes back, I would ask that we be allowed at least to, my concern is that she already answered and the jury heard, and then the speaking objection indicated to the court or to the jury that a student was involved. And I would at least like to clarify with her that she doesn't have any personal knowledge of why he was fired.
So you're
If or
objecting to
why.
the question, but you want to address the question?
Well, my concern, Your Honor, is that based on Ms. Maxfield's statements, as well as the Ms. Borcherding, and I realize it was the delay in the video that makes it a little bit difficult, The fact that he was fired has already come in, and there's been a suggestion that it was due to some issue with a student, and I would at least like to clarify that that she has no personal knowledge of why or when he was fired.
Well, I think I can handle it as far as just instructing the jury on disregarding any answer they may have heard. Frankly, I think I started to speak over Ms. Borcherding pretty quickly, but I'll instruct the jury to disregard any answer they may have heard from her as well as the question, and that we'll move on.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Okay, so we're ready for the jury?
Yeah.
All rise for the jury.
All right, everyone can be seated. And just so the jurors know, when you come in, you can sit right away. We're standing for you at that point. As I told you at the beginning of the trial, there would be times when I would sustain objections, and I have done so in this case, which means that you will disregard the question that was asked, and to the extent you heard any answer, you would disregard that as well. Ms. Maxfield?
Thank you. Ms. Borcherding, were you familiar with Dan Brophy's teaching style? Had you personally witnessed that?
Yes,
And is it fair to say that Mr. Brophy had a very, very dry sense of humor?
yes,
Is it fair that part of that dry sense of humor sometimes involves sarcasm?
often,
And sometimes could Chef Brophy be dismissive of some students?
yes,
Could he also sometimes embarrass a student or humiliate a student?
yes.
And was that sort of an ongoing issue over the years?
I thought it was. There are a couple of different schools of how it's appropriate to manage in the hospitality industry. There are some people who feel that training should be like a Marine Corps boot camp. And if you think someone isn't measuring up, you haze them. Other people who feel like it's better to instill a sense of accomplishment and pride without sarcasm or humiliation, or the way some old school chefs do, simply throw a frying pan at someone if you didn't like what they were doing. Dan was an incredibly knowledgeable instructor in many, many areas. If he thought a student worthy of his time and attention, he was the best instructor and mentor that a student could ask for. But if for whatever reason he was not happy with a student, he could be pretty harsh.
Now, in that voice message you left for him, you said something about, was it a student? Were you talking about whether it was a student who had been the victim or of this shooting, or a student who had been the shooter?
Possibly either.
And why did you worry that a student could be the shooter?
We had a lot of students who were ex-military who had come to school on the GI Bill, some of which had multiple combat tours in Iraq or Afghanistan, and some of them suffered from PTSD.
I want to shift gears for just a little bit and ask you about live fire. You talked about the fact that this was a big deal for the students. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Was it also a pretty stressful, a high stress day for students?
Absolutely.
Is there, at OCI, was there a more high stress day than a live fire day?
Up until that time in their training, I would say no. The first day in the restaurant, which was in the third term, could have been equally stressful, but up until that point, T2 live fire was definitely the high point in terms of stress.
There's been testimony about a bay door or a garage door that had been left open on the morning of June 2nd. Were you aware that that was an issue that day?
I was aware of that afterwards. One of the administrators told me that Dan was running late and had not closed the bay door.
Was whether the fact that that bay door was left open, was that an issue for the administration on more days than June 2nd?
It wasn't left open often, usually just to load in or load out. Because of where we were and because there was a fairly significant homeless population in the area, you wouldn't want to leave that door open and not have anybody in the area monitoring it.
Would it be fair to say that whether that door was open or closed was unpredictable? In other words, you wouldn't know that that door was going to be open at a 7:30 or 7:15 on a Saturday necessarily.
You wouldn't expect it to be, no.
Okay. So whether it was open or closed would be primarily up to whoever had shown up, and one couldn't predict whether that door was going to be open at any given time.
Correct. In fact, other than loading in, you wouldn't expect it to be open at all.
you'd mentioned just a moment ago about the homeless camps in the area. You were at OCI for how many years?
Oh, gosh. From 6 months of the time we opened until 2015.
Okay.
So it was quite a few years.
And did the just the kind of general nature of the Goose Hollow neighborhood change over the course that over the time that you were there?
Yeah, it really did. Towards the end, the character of the homeless population in the area became much more aggressive. At the beginning, we would have people that would, for example, sleep under the overhang at the administrative building. And, there were people who lost their jobs and then lost their housing and then lost their cars. They would read books and be very pleasant. Students might even bring them a cup of coffee in the morning. But over several years, the panhandling was much more aggressive. There was obviously a lot more drug use. I'm also on the board of the Alliance Française, which is just up the hill from the Goose Hollow train station. And the owner of the camp house, who the Alliance is located in, was stabbed last year by a homeless person. There was a lot more crime. There was a lot more aggressive behavior.
And that increase in aggressive behavior and crime, was that occurring as long ago as 2018?
Yes.
In all the years that you've known Nancy Brophy, has she ever, even when you guys had less brief contact, you would talk to her at least once a year about your Medicare, is that right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, at least that often.
And if you were at OCI and she was there visiting her husband or there for another event, you guys would chat with one another.
Yes. Yeah.
In kind of a people who have known each other for a long time way. Well, first
She was always introduced as the good Mrs. Brophy.
Okay. Pardon me, the good Mrs. Brophy? Is that what you said?
Good Mrs. Brophy.
Okay.
Yes.
First of all, did Nancy Brophy talk about Dan Brophy frequently?
Oh, yes.
And in all the times that she talked about Dan Brophy, did she ever have a harsh word for the man?
Never once.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
All right, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple follow-up questions for me. Ms. Borcherding, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. And it sounds like over the years that you would see Nancy Brophy at the Oregon Culinary Institute for various reasons.
Occasionally, I didn't see her at OCI very often.
Okay, and so when you just were testifying that she'd sometimes be there to visit Dan or at events, that would be at the Culinary Institute?
If she were visiting Dan, it would be at the Culinary Institute.
And you talked a little bit about Dan Brophy's teaching style. Was that the style that he'd had since you knew him?
Yes.
And would you say, and as you were describing him earlier, that he's a pretty consistent, routine-driven type of person?
In general, I'd say so, yes.
You mentioned just there near the end of your testimony on with defense that you knew about stabbing that happened in 2021. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you know anything about what happened?
There was a homeless person whom the building owner would occasionally help out financially. And apparently he came over one day and asked for money, and the owner said he didn't have any, and he was stabbed.
And you talked a little bit about that roll-up door in what we've been referring to as the storeroom. Is that what you know it as?
Correct. That was the dry storage.
And what's the concern about leaving that door open? Is it related to theft?
Well, theft or just unauthorized people coming in. For whatever reason, our responsibility was to protect the students and protect the property.
There's a fair amount of goods and other things stored in that storeroom. Is that right?
Correct.
And to your knowledge, how many times has someone unauthorized come into that area?
I would have no idea for several reasons, because most of my time when I was at school, I was either in the administrative office or in the classroom, and the door was rarely open without someone in attendance. I know that there were some student property that was stolen at one point, and so we stopped leaving, for example, the student door unlocked.
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
All right, Ms. Borcherding, thank you, and you can disconnect.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right, who is the state's next witness?
Your Honor, the state will call Karen Brophy.
Okay. Ms. Brophy will have you come up near the chair that's in that box area. All right, if you could raise your hand, my clerk will give you an oath.
Okay. Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, then you can go ahead and have a seat.
You can go ahead and have a seat, and you can take off your mask while you testify. And there is a pitcher of water there too, if you want any water. I can't hear you. Yeah, I know, I don't want to do that yet. All right, when you're ready, we're going to have you state your full name and spell it for the record.
My name is Karen Brophy, spelled Karenbrophy.
All right, you can inquire.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mrs. Brophy, how do you know Nancy Brophy?
How do I know her?
Yes.
As a daughter-in-law.
Who's your daughter-in-law?
Yes,
She was married to your son.
that's right.
Which one of your sons was she married to?
To Dan.
Dan Brophy.
Mhm.
Do you recall when they got married?
No,
Been quite a while though.
it has.
And do you know if Dan and Nancy ever had any children of their own?
No, they didn't.
Did the home that Dan and Nancy lived in at the time of Dan's death, is that the only home that you knew that they owned?
That they owned?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay. And they lived in there for quite some time?
yes.
We're going to have you testify a couple of times, as you know. And so this morning, all I really want to focus on is the morning of June 2nd, okay, of 2018. On that morning, do you recall hearing anything about a problem at the Culinary Institute?
The only way I heard about it was a phone call from Nancy.
So you didn't see anything on the news or?
No,
Okay, and nobody else alerted
no,
you?
no,
You got a call from Nancy?
right.
Do you remember, I know it's been 4 years, almost 4 years, but do you happen to remember about what time of morning it was that you got that phone call?
Well, I've thought about it a lot, but I would say around 9 o'clock, but I can't be positive.
Okay. In looking at phone records of Nancy Brophy, it maybe looks like she called you about 10:16 or around 10:15 in the morning. Does that sound right to you?
It might be.
Okay. Do you remember for about how long you spoke with Nancy?
Probably not very long, maybe 5 minutes or a little better.
And when she called you, what did she tell you?
I think she asked me if I'd had TV on, and I said no. And she said, well, I've just had a call from Max. And there's been, I don't remember if she said shooting or trouble at the school. And I said to her, well, are you going to go down there? And she said, no, I'm not going to go because there'd just be a lot of policemen there and a lot of cars. I'm not going to go. And I think that was basically the phone call.
Okay. So you said you asked her if she was going to go down there.
I did.
And she said no.
Yes.
Sounds like she gave you a reason as to why she didn't really want to go. Did you respond to that or encourage her to
I
go?
didn't at that point.
And you think that was probably the extent of the phone call?
Yes.
When you were talking to her during that phone call, was she calm? Was she frantic? How did she seem to you?
She just sounded like Nancy, calm. I don't think she felt, it didn't sound like she was panicky.
Okay. So she was clear, articulate?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
During that phone call, did she happen to say what time she thought Dan had left or whether she thought he would be there?
No, I don't think we talked about that.
Did she say where she was that morning?
I think she said she'd been home in bed.
Did she disclose to you that she had actually been downtown that morning?
No,
Did she say anything about going out and getting coffee and then coming back home?
I don't think so.
After you talked to Nancy that time, what appears to be around 10, quarter after 10 in the morning, What did you do once you got off the phone?
I thought about what she'd said. And I don't know if I went out and talked to Jack. Jack was in the yard. And came back in, and I just thought that she needed to go to the school. So I called her. And I said, Nancy, I think you need to go down there. And she said, well, okay, I will.
Again, what was her tone like that time? Was she defensive or was she just normal again?
Kind of resigned, I think. You know, well, yes, okay, I'll go.
I see. And sorry, I don't mean to jump around, but you mentioned the name Jack. Could you tell us who Jack is?
Jack is my husband,
And is that Dan's father?
Dan's father.
Now, when you said you called Nancy back, she agreed that she probably should go down.
Right.
Do you recall if you called her cell phone back or if you called a home line or a landline?
I'm going to say the landline.
You think you called her landline back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
And do you think that that is the last time you spoke with her that morning?
No.
You think you spoke with her a third time?
Yes.
And when do you think that might have been?
When?
Yes.
Well, closer to 11.
And looking at phone records, it appears maybe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that call might have come in about 11:15. Does that sound about right?
When I called her again?
For the third time?
Yes. Yeah, that sounds about right.
And what did she tell you then? Did she tell you where she was?
Yes.
Where was she?
I said to her, I have to refer back to the second call, I guess.
Okay.
I had said, well, if you find anything out, let me know. So when I called her again, I'm going to say it was probably close to an hour. And I wondered, by that time, I thought she should know something if she'd gone down. So I said, what's going on? And she said, well, I'm in the car with the police. It was Dan.
Did she tell you any more than that?
You know, after she said that, I don't remember if there was any more conversation. I was absolutely devastated.
And I'm sorry to keep talking about it.
Okay.
But based on the earlier two calls, she hadn't told you what she really thought had happened. Is that correct?
No, not at the time.
So when you talked to her that third time and she said it was Dan, did you sort of make the next step in the line of thinking, or did she tell you what that meant?
Your
when
Honor,
she
I
said
have a matter for the court.
Again, for just a moment.
Go ahead and leave the record running. All rise for the jury.
All right, everyone can be seated.
That's true.
I'm not actually sure whether we're on the record or not, since
Looks
the
like you're
numbers
not.
aren't working.
It's blank.
They haven't been working.
It
Well,
hasn't
no,
been working.
they've been like that all day.
Oh.
I just don't know if it was left. Is the record still on?
The record is still running.
Okay.
The conference is not working today. I'm gonna fix it later.
All right, go ahead.
Your Honor, I anticipate the council wants to elicit from this witness statements that my clients made. The discovery rules would require the state to disclose that to us in advance. We don't have any report that would tell us about statements that our client purportedly made to Karen Brophy over the course of time after she lets her mother-in-law know that Dan Brophy has been shot. So without disclosure of those statements, I would object to any examination that seeks to elicit that.
Date stamp page 4418 is an email from Miss Karen Brophy that states exactly what I just elicited.
Oh, well, I don't think she's objecting to what you elicited. I think she's objecting to what you might be about to elicit and whether or not they are statements that haven't been provided to them. Are the statements that you're, so I guess the first question is, are you about to elicit statements?
I don't know what she's going to say, Your Honor, because it's not in the email. That's what I'm trying to say. She has stated what is in the email. I'm asking if there was anything else said. I don't know if there was.
Your Honor, the discovery that's been provided to us, we've had that he's been shot and killed, and the next paragraph says, as I remember, this was the total of the conversation. I don't know if this was helpful at all, just to clarify my conversations with Nancy that morning. It's my understanding that we're now going to move from whatever this conversation was that was provided in discovery to subsequent conversations, and I would object to that.
Well, if the objection is that, I mean, the state needs to produce, of course, all statements that are in their possession. What Mr. Overstreet is saying is he doesn't know if there's any additional statements or not. Since he doesn't know that, I don't see how it'd be in their possession to provide in discovery. So on that basis, I'll overrule, but of course we don't know what the witness will say. So let's bring the jury back in.
Just a suggestion. Would it be maybe better to take our morning break now, since we're at that kind of time, instead of bringing the jury back in just for a few more minutes and then sending them back out? I mean, obviously it's up to the court. But.
Well, I think I'd rather get through this direct testimony and then take the break before cross-examination. Let's go ahead and bring the jury back in.
I know.
You don't have to stay standing, Miss Brophy.
I'm okay.
Okay.
Feels good to stand.
All right. Okay.
All rise for the jury.
All right, everyone can be seated. And Mr. Overstreet, if you could repeat your question.
Yes, thank you. So Mrs. Brophy, I'll actually go back to the last question to then ask you what I had asked you before we took our little break. That was when you called Nancy Brophy for that third time, you had said that Miss Brophy had told you that it was Dan.
Right.
Did she say any more during that conversation? Did she say what she thought had happened to Dan at that point?
If she did, I don't remember. I was pretty distraught at that time.
Mrs. Brophy, do you recall sending an email to my office on June 10th, 2020?
No,
Okay. If I were to show you an email, could you verify that this was an email that you possibly sent?
sure.
Take a look at that and just tell me if you recognize that as an email that you sent to my office.
Yes.
And if you could, please read that second paragraph to yourself, and I'll ask you a question about that.
Okay.
So after reading that, does that help you remember what Ms. Brophy told you during that third phone conversation?
Yes.
Tell us what it is that you remember about what Ms. Brophy told you during that third conversation.
That Dan was shot and killed.
Did she tell you how she knew that?
No. I guess I assumed the police had told her that.
She didn't elaborate on how she would have known that before she talked to the detectives?
No.
And even after reviewing this email, do you recall if there was anything else that was said during that conversation?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And once again, what was her tone and demeanor like during that conversation?
She said it was Dan. It was a very matter of fact thing. It was Dan.
Was she crying? At least as much as you could tell over her phone.
I said, "Oh, Nancy," and I was crying, and she did cry.
After she told you? Did you say anything else to her?
No,
Is that the
not
end?
that I remember. That was the end of the conversation.
Okay. Was that the last time you think you spoke with her that morning, at least?
Yes.
I have no further questions.
Got up, but we do need to take our morning break. So we will be back on the record at just about a little before 5 till 11, but we'll take our morning 15-minute break.
Okay, we'll go off the record. We are now in recess. I'll meet us for the weapon. All rise.
All right, please be seated. And defense, when you're ready for cross-examination.
Thank you. Good morning, Mrs. Brophy. Did you and I have a chance to look at some phone records over the break?
Yes.
Okay. And the phone records I showed you were phone records from Nancy Brophy's cell phone from the morning of June 2nd.
Yes.
And I think you testified that you remember having 3 phone calls with Nancy Brophy that morning.
Right.
The first call, the phone records show the first call that might be to you was made at 10:16 a.m. And it was to this number, 503-244-3471. I'm sorry. What?
Can we have a sidebar real briefly?
Sure.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I know.
All right, Ms. Maxfield, when you're ready.
The call at 10:16, did that go to your landline?
Yes.
Pardon me?
Yes.
Okay. The second call that shows up in the phone records occurs at 10:44 a.m. Does that seem about right?
I believe so.
Maybe a half an hour after the first call that Ms. Brophy made to you.
Right.
And this call was made from a different number. Would that have been your cell phone?
Yes.
And 10:44 a.m. seems like the correct time for the second call.
Yes.
Then at 11:45, you called Ms. Brophy again. Does that sound right?
Yes.
And on this time, you used your cell phone again.
Yes.
So earlier when you testified about a call made on a landline, you were talking about your own landline?
The first one? Yes. Uh-huh.
Okay. How long does it take to get from the Brophy's house, Dan and Nancy Brophy's house, down to OCI? What would you estimate?
From Dan and Nancy's house to
Yeah.
OCI?
Uh-huh.
Well, it depends on traffic, but
Would it be more than 10 minutes?
it could be, sure.
Okay. So your second call was made at 10:44. Would it surprise you that Ms. Brophy began her recorded interview with the police at 10:47?
You know, when it comes to the time,
Sure.
I'm not a young person anymore.
You're doing
so
great.
Therefore, right, I cannot specify time.
Okay. Back in, on June 2nd of 2018, was your husband still driving
Yes,
a car?
yes.
That morning, you guys didn't get in your car and drive to OCI?
Jack did,
Jack did?
yes.
But that would have been after 11:45, is that right? I know we're talking
No,
about
I
times.
think it was before that.
Okay,
It
before
was
your
before
third
that.
call
Yes, I think so,
and after your second call?
yes.
I don't have anything further. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Judge. Yeah. Mrs. Brophy, I just have a couple of follow-up questions for you, okay? On direct, you talked about that second call when you called Miss Brophy back. And I believe you stated that it was during that phone call that you had encouraged Miss Brophy to go down to the Culinary Institute.
Yes.
And I just want to be clear, she wasn't telling you that she was already there?
No,
Said that Jack,
the third call she did, not the second.
and by the third call, around 11:45, well, during that second call, when she said that she hadn't left yet, do you think that that was a relatively short conversation?
As I remember, it was.
Like possibly 30 seconds or less?
I'm not sure.
Okay. And you stated that Jack, your husband, did leave for the school.
Did.
And you believe that was after that second call?
I think so. I think so.
And do you recall any conversation that you had with Jack Brophy as to why he would go as opposed to you or both of you?
I'm not proud of the fact that I felt like I couldn't go.
Ms. Brophy, this is almost 4 years ago, and we're asking you to differentiate between minutes. Is it possible that some of the things that you and Nancy talked about over the period of 2 or 3 phone calls could get mixed up a little bit and maybe remembering one thing from one phone call as if it was part of another phone call?
Could be.
I don't believe I have any further questions. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Brophy.
All right, and Mr. Overstreet, I heard you say that Ms. Brophy may be called again, so not excused at this point, correct?
Technically not, yes. Your
Okay, all right, but Ms. Brophy, you can go ahead and step down. And who's the state's next witness?
Yes, Your Honor, the state's going to call Officer Cassandra Wells.
Okay. All right, Officer Wells, if you can come up and go ahead and step into the witness box, but just stay standing by the seat.
Under the penalty of perjury, do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this case will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, then you may be seated.
When you are ready, you can
Can we
inquire.
have the officers call him?
Officer Wells, if you can state your full name and spell both.
It's Cassandra Wells, Cassandra. Last is spelled Wells.
All right, you can inquire.
Good morning, Officer Wells. How are you currently employed?
I'm a police officer with the city of Portland.
And how long have you been employed as a police officer?
A little over 15 and a half years.
And what is your current assignment?
Right now I'm acting sergeant in charge of the PPI bike squad and also responsibilities with Central, which is downtown, precinct day shift.
And can you briefly describe your background, training, and experience to become a police officer?
Sure. I was hired in September 2006, and I pretty immediately went down to the basic police state academy in Salem. And during that time, it was 10 weeks at the Salem Academy. And then right after that, in January 2007, I went to Portland's Advanced Academy. It's all classroom stuff, learning how to shoot, learning how to drive, learning how to take police calls. So the Portland Academy was 16 weeks at that time. And then after that, you're with a field training officer for several months between phases 0 and 4. And then phase 5, you work independently, but you're still on probation. So I completed all of that. And then, every year we have annual in-service and additional classes or things online that we have to do to keep up our certification.
And back in June of 2018, where were you working, or what was your assignment at that time?
I was day shift patrol officer and also a field training officer.
And so as part of that responsibility, are you responding to calls for service?
Yes.
And any type of call?
Yes.
And do you recall if you were working on June 2nd of 2018?
Yes, I was.
And were you on a call already, or where were you before information came out about the Oregon Culinary Institute?
I was on a separate, unrelated call, but near the location.
And what information, or how did you first get directed to the Oregon Culinary Institute?
So to explain how Central Precinct works, we used to have 5 precincts, now we have 3. So when Southeast Precinct went away, it got divided on the east side of the river. So Central Precinct is now responsible for 39th Avenue to the west. So we call it the east and west side, and we have cars that have districts on the east side, cars that have districts on the west side and up in the Southwest Hills. So typically we stay on our own side of the river. We can cross over if the east side's busy or vice versa. So myself and my trainee at the time, Officer Burns, were on a different call near 17th and Jefferson, and I heard dispatch 2 east side cars, so they'd have to come across the river to the Oregon Culinary Institute. I heard that. I knew we were wrapping up our call, and I radioed, we're going to be clearing, we'll head to that to prevent the east side cars from having to come over. And it was about medical was on scene asking for Code 3 police.
And what does that mean, Code 3 police?
That means that they need us there immediately. You typically drive lights and sirens to the call, usually a crime in progress or somebody's injured and needs immediate assistance. But Portland Fire was there first and said, we need Code 3 police. And that's the initial dispatch that we got.
And so what did you and Officer Burns do?
Well, Officer Burns was driving, so she drove Code 3 to the location, and we entered from, I believe we were on 18th, and entered onto Southwest Madison. And en route, we were there, I think within 3 minutes of that first dispatch. There wasn't much more information we got. I think dispatch radioed that there was suspicious circumstances for the victim that they were working on, and right when we were arriving, we got info that the victim was a shooting victim, and medical was still working on the patient.
All right. And so do you recall, are you familiar with the Oregon Culinary Institute at all?
I mean, I know that they're a school. I had never been to that one at 17th and Jefferson.
All right. And so when you got there, how did you figure out where to go? And do you remember kind of what side of the building you entered from?
Yeah, so I think dispatch had radioed to enter from 17th, but from where we were coming from, it was easier for us to go down Madison from 18th. So we arrived on the north side of the building, and we were kind of looking around, and then I saw a Portland firefighter standing at the door that would have been on the north side of the building facing Madison, waving us in. Like, I mean, he was like, like, hurry up, get in here, get in here. So we just stopped there and ran up to the firefighter that had the door open to the building.
And on that side, the north side of the building, is there a parking lot there?
Yes.
Do you remember if you went into the parking lot or where you were?
I don't remember where Officer Burns parked our car, but I mean, I had to run through the parking lot to get to the door.
All right. And so once you were you the first officers on scene?
Yes.
Once you got to the door and got into the building, can you walk us through kind of what you saw, what you did?
Sure. So I remember the medic said, "Hey, we have a shooting victim." He told me that the victim had 2 bullet holes in his chest, and there's casings laying near him, and the fire personnel were still working on him. So we entered the building. Oh, he also told us that there was a bunch of students sitting like in this break room area with their hands on the table. So we entered, and I believe it was to my left, there was like 15 to 20 people sitting around tables with their hands on the tables, and I just told them to, stay where they were, keep their hands on their table. I was trying to figure out where the shooter was, since we just got info that the victim was a shooting victim. We got no info on that, and everybody looked terrified or were crying. And I called for additional resources because there was way too much going on for just 2 of us.
And so did you at that point stay there in that like seating, and that seating area is right as you come in the door?
Yeah.
Did you stay there? Did you go further into the building?
I didn't go further into the building until a little bit later. I kind of directed the next officers on scene. I directed them because we could hear the fire, and I could see fire people coming in and out of where the victim was found in the kitchen, or in one of the kitchens. So, I wanted to keep an eye on everybody there, and so I directed the next officers to the kitchen area. And then once a couple supervisors arrived on scene and additional officers, they cleared the rest of the building and made it secure.
Okay. And so then does that involve like literally going through the building?
Yes, to look for additional people, maybe a shooter, maybe more victims. So while I was dealing with the 15 to 20 people, other people, including the supervisors at that time, cleared the building to make sure no one else was in there.
And as you're with the people that are sitting in that lounge area, are you giving them instructions or asking questions or just sort of monitoring the situation?
At first, just monitoring, but then I asked some pretty like vague questions. I was trying to figure out who would be the like maybe key witnesses to what happened, how the victim was found. And I identified 2 people that I wanted to interview. And then I assigned Officer Chaco, I believe, at the time to watch everybody else while the building was getting cleared and more people were coming in to assist. Crime scene tape getting set up. Eventually, medical pronounced the victim deceased. And then I pulled two of who I found to be probably the witnesses with the most information out of the building and interviewed them separately.
All right. And by the time you interviewed, then the scene was secure and you were just now kind of trying to figure out what was going on.
Yes.
All right. After conducting those interviews, had other investigators and detectives arrived at that point?
After that, homicide was paged out and slowly started trickling in. Officer Barth had started a crime scene log and had stationed at the kitchen door. I had gone back in at some point to give him the names of all the medical personnel that had been in there working on the victim so he could write those down. And then eventually, I think some more people from maybe the president of the Organ Institute arrived, and we were able to open the administrative building across the street and move all the people over to the admin building. And we had officers stay with them so they wouldn't talk about anything that happens and just keep an eye on them until we got directions from detectives.
As part of sort of the watching of the people in that room, were you or other officers directing people not to touch their belongings or access anything?
Yeah, I mean, I told them like, hey, we don't know what's going on here. Keep your hands on the table. We don't know who did this, just in case, I mean, we hadn't talked to any of them yet or anything. And, the building is a crime scene, so we don't want them to go through their stuff and take anything out. So once we moved them to the admin building, they left all their stuff in the institute if they had it in there.
All right. And as part of your responsibilities when it's determined to be a homicide scene, it sounds like you and other officers kind of secure everything and then other people come in.
Right. Yes.
And is it part of your responsibilities then to communicate to the investigating detectives or the homicide team kind of what's been going on?
Yes.
And so what did that look like?
So typically the officers and or sergeants that arrive on scene first, or it doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the people that arrive on scene first, but whoever gathers the most information briefs detectives. So for me on this scene, what I did, who I interviewed, what they said, all the other information I had gathered. We go into our mobile command center and give all the information we have, and it can be who the victim is if we found that out, witnesses we talked to, what exactly we did, what we saw, and we brief detectives and give them everything we have.
And in this particular case, did you assist with identifying, or at least preliminarily identifying, the person who had been shot in this case?
Yeah, I mean, talking to one of the witnesses, and I mean, the students all knew who Mr. Brophy was, so yes, we had identified who the victim was.
All right. And did you, either when you first got there or as you went back in, did you walk through the building yourself or go in various places?
I didn't walk through the entire building. The initial parts, and from what I remember, like from where I entered, long hallway, all the students and maybe some of the staff were on the left sitting at the tables. And then you walk down a little further, and the kitchen where the victim was found, Mr. Brophy, was on the right. And from what I remember, there was a long hallway then to the left, but that was kind of my limiting walkthrough of the building.
So you didn't go exploring around or figure out what else was in there?
No.
And from where you were as you went in and kind of tried to figure out what was going on, could you see the entirety of the building or know what else was there from where you were?
I mean, it seemed like a relatively large building. I mean, it was a cooking school, so from what I remember, like looking down the hallway, there was some other rooms that appeared to be at least another kitchen. But that building incorporated what, like at least a half a block, I believe. So it just looked like a school with had kitchens and like a classroom and stuff.
All right. Once you'd conducted your interviews and had briefed detectives, did you get some more information, or what was your role at that point?
We have to be released from either a supervisor or detectives. And it was at the beginning of our shift. So I was just kind of hanging out, and I was out on the street, and the president that I had talked to of the institute had told me that Mr. Brophy's wife was arriving and coming in from 17th and Jefferson. So I walked over to that area because we had other police officers blocking off 17th at Jefferson. And Nancy Brophy walked up from Jefferson somewhere onto 17th and met with me.
Okay, and so were you standing further inside the scene when you got that information and then walked over there?
Yeah. I mean, I was probably standing around like 17th and Madison, and then I got the info and I walked towards Jefferson. I didn't leave the crime scene. And Nancy walked in from Jefferson.
And where did she come to? Did you direct her over? Do you remember?
From what I remember, I told the officer that she could come in, and then I just met her like in the middle of the street, just north of Jefferson on 17th.
And did you know who she was independently of being told that at that time?
No, I mean, the president told me she was coming in and may have even like pointed her out. But before that, no, I had no idea who she was.
And do you see Nancy Brophy in the courtroom here today?
Yes.
And can you describe the color of her shirt?
Like salmon shirt with a tan cardigan.
All right. And when she walked up to you, what was your interaction with her?
Well, she immediately started crying, and I gave her a big hug, and then I didn't talk about the case at all and just stood with her until detectives relieved me and contacted her themselves.
And so were you standing with her just inside the crime tape was all the way along Jefferson blocking 17th, is that right?
Yes. We walked a little ways up because like I knew where the mobile command center was, and I think there's another van that had detectives in it. So we just kind of stood out on 17th in the middle of the street because it was blocked off, and hung out there standing together until detectives grabbed her.
And you guys didn't have any conversation about what was going on or anything of that nature?
No, not that I recall. And I obviously didn't tell her what was going on.
And do you recall if Ms. Brophy was asking you any questions about what was going on or what had happened or who was involved?
I don't, it was almost 4 years ago, so I don't remember. Yeah.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
Morning.
Hi.
You're an acting sergeant right now?
Yes.
So is it Sergeant Wells?
Yes.
All right. So I think you said that when you first met with Brian Wilkie, who is the president of OCI, you talked with him about getting a number for Ms. Brophy. So
Yeah, I asked him about, I think the other gal I talked to, Dorothy Damon, mentioned, I asked her about family.
okay.
And she mentioned that Mr. Brophy had a wife, Nancy, but didn't have her number. And then the president, Mr. Wilkie, came and gave me Mr. Brophy's parents' info and their phone number, but I believe didn't have Nancy's phone number.
Okay. Do you have a specific recollection of talking with him about Nancy's number?
I mean, I was getting info about the family. He didn't have her number, and then he gave me information of all the students that hadn't arrived yet either, and their phone numbers and the janitor's phone number. So, I mean, it was a homicide scene. So, I mean, I remember talking to him about everybody that wasn't there, including family, and getting phone numbers. So, yes, I do.
Okay. Well, I want to talk with you a little bit more about Mr. Wilkie, but let's talk about Chef Damon, Sadie Damon. She was one of the very first people you talked with there.
Yes, Dorothy Damon. Yes.
Right. Yes, Dorothy is her real name, her given name. What did she tell you about when she had arrived that morning?
Do you mind if I look at my notes for times?
Oh, not at all.
Okay.
No, please do.
So I know she had told me that she was another instructor there, had arrived, I'd have to look at my report for time. She arrived around 7:30, and noticed that a roll-up door was open off, the roll-up like storage access door, which I believe was off 17th. She said that was normal because Mr. Brophy usually arrived first and would roll up that door and bring supplies in through that way.
And was that door still open when you got there? Did you observe it open as well?
I did not observe it open. She told me she shut it around 8.
Okay. So she told you that she had shut that door around 8.
I believe so, yes.
And then what did she tell you about what she had done in between the time she shut that door and the time Mr. Brophy was discovered?
She said she was getting her kitchen ready because she was an instructor. And that's kind of what they do is they get their kitchen ready prior to the students arriving. She told me Mr. Brophy would normally open the door for the students, which faces Madison, which was the door I had arrived at that had the parking lot. I guess that's where all the students parked. She said Mr. Brophy would normally have it open, and she went up there, I think she said around 8:15, and noticed that the door was still locked, which seemed strange to her because normally Mr. Brophy opened it. So she unlocked the door to let the students in because they were gathering in the parking lot, and then she walked over to the admin building to change. She came back and at some point heard screaming and people were on the phone with 911. She went to see what the commotion was about and saw Mr. Brophy lying on the floor, went over, held his hand, said he was lifeless and cold to the touch.
Okay. And I think you'd also mentioned that you'd set up a command center across the street. It was being set up later.
Later, yes.
Okay. And was that, the reason I'm asking you about that is you just referred to the admin building. Was that over next to that admin building across Madison?
I believe the command center was set up on 17th at Madison.
Okay.
So the admin building would have been across Madison to the north, kind of like where I entered. It was almost directly across, but maybe just slightly west. And then the command center was set up on 17th, from my recollection.
All right.
At
So
Madison.
the command center wasn't really in between the two buildings, but it was on Madison, which does run between the two
It was on
buildings.
17th, the mobile command center.
17th and Madison, though.
Yeah, right around there,
Okay.
from my memory.
Okay, great. And then I think you said it was Mr. Wilkie who talked with you about the students who had not yet arrived.
Right.
What did he tell you about that?
He was just.
Objection, Your Honor, Thursday.
Well, we could recall her afterwards, I suppose.
I'll sustain the objection.
Right. So going, I guess the one other thing about the investigation I wanted to ask you about was you had described the process of clearing the building. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? Just describe what was happening.
Well, I wasn't part of the clear team, but if we get called to a location where there's maybe like a crime in progress, or in this case, someone was murdered, and we don't know where the suspect is, we would clear to, one, make sure the suspect isn't in the building, or two, to potentially find additional victims. So, I mean, I wasn't part of the clear team, but it's something that we do as police officers to ensure crime scene integrity, to look for potential other victims and or suspect. So in that case, we're trained to start at one point, and then work our way through the building, clearing every room, closets in the room, and whatnot. And why we go in, so you have a long hallway and there's a bunch of other rooms, you would go into the first room you come to and post an officer to watch down the hallway to make sure there's no one like running in between rooms, I guess, or running out of the building. So officers and sergeants cleared the building looking for people or other victims and to
Okay.
secure it.
Great, thank you. But that particular morning, you were not a part of the clear team.
No.
So when you were speaking with Mr. Wilkie, you indicated, I think, that you had then briefed the detectives, and it was right at that point that he re-engaged with you to let you know that Ms. Brophy had arrived.
Yeah, it was sometime after briefing with detectives. I feel like,
Do you have the exact time that she arrived?
I don't think I wrote that in my report. So no, I don't.
Okay, just roughly, like, give us a range of a time that would have been about.
I don't, I got there at like 8:33.
If you don't know, it's okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'd have to completely guess and I could completely be wrong. So
All right.
I'd rather not do that.
So it sounds like your best recollection, though, is that it came immediately as you were finishing the briefing with detectives. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, it seemed like, excuse me, it seemed like it was relatively soon after that, because at that point I was pretty much done and just, waiting to be relieved. But usually some officers stay on the crime scene to make sure no one comes in or out. But I wasn't one of those. So, if I was done briefing detectives, I would have probably been released relatively quickly. But then Wilkie told me that Nancy Brophy was arriving
Okay, where did that briefing occur? Where were you actually talking with the detectives?
in the mobile command center.
Okay, so that was at 17th and Madison.
Yeah.
So Mr. Wilkie was outside at that point and came over to the command center to let you know, or how did he?
I mean,
communicate that?
he didn't come into the command center. I was back outside away from it. And I had talked to him earlier, and interviewed him, so he knew who I was. And I'm assuming that's why he had approached me to tell me that she was arriving.
Okay, all right. And then, so where did you actually engage with her? You went over to greet her, I take
Yeah,
it?
so it was on 17th, like in the middle of the street, but again, it was shut down. And then just north of Jefferson, so between Jefferson and Madison on 17th.
Where, did you see where she parked, or was she out of her vehicle at that point? Can you just describe to her or describe to us how you engaged her?
From my memory, she had parked somewhere. I mean, I didn't see her pull up, but from my memory and what I remember of her walking in, she had parked somewhere to the east off of Jefferson.
Okay, so
Based off how she, like, from what I remember her walking up and me waving to the officer, says you can let her in.
all right, all right. So were you walking toward each other from a distance? Can you kind of describe how you first greeted each other?
I mean, I walked a little toward the patrol car that was holding the street closed with crime scene across it. and then she just walked up and I don't know, she saw me and walked up to me and then just started crying. And then I gave her a hug.
And where did the two of you wait while you were waiting, for the detectives then to have time to talk with her?
It was still in the middle of the street on 17th between Jefferson and Madison.
Did she look generally physically the same as she does today, or was there a noticeable difference in her physical appearance that day?
I mean, she looks relatively close to the same. She was,
I'm asking specifically about weight. Do you remember about how heavy she was then?
no, I mean, she looks like she might have lost a little bit of weight, but no, I don't remember.
Okay, that's fair enough. All right, and it sounds like there was an acknowledgement of what had happened. She started crying, right?
Yeah.
Did the two of you talk at all, or were we just kind of standing there silently?
I mean, it's awkward, right? You have a wife show up and you know that her husband was shot, and she's crying, but you also have a investigation and integrity to hold up. So what do you say, right? I mean, we didn't talk about anything that had happened. You know, my job is to let detectives do that, and not give away anything because, you know, who did it at that point, we didn't know. So I don't know if we made small talk about something else. I don't recall that conversation, but it was fairly awkward for me.
Okay. And was Mr. Wilkie still standing out in that area? I mean, you're basically out in the street at that point,
Yeah.
right? And you've got pretty good sight lines.
I don't remember where he was. He might have been standing near us, but I mean, it was also my job to not have anyone talk to her. Like she hadn't been interviewed. So I don't remember where he was after he told me she was arriving.
You've described that at least earlier, and I think still, the OCI students were in the lobby, in the student lounge, and were sitting there with their hands on the table. But were there other OCI administrators or other older people associated with the school who were congregating in that outdoor area?
So are we talking earlier because we had moved all the students to the admin building before Nancy arrived?
Right, so they're contained, and I assume they're not
Yeah.
visible as she walks up, right?
No, I wouldn't think so. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm asking about the older people, the people running the school.
So
Wilkie and
Wilkie arrived late and he wasn't allowed to enter the building because it was a crime scene and we had it locked down. And I mean, he was obviously out there because he told me she arrived. I don't remember where he was standing when she arrived. The only other person that I remember being like a staff member was Dorothy, who I had talked to. And at that point, I don't know if she was talking to detectives or if she had gone into the admin building. So I don't know who the other staff members would have been that were congregating.
Okay, did
if
you
any,
see some
'cause I don't
people
remember.
out there though who were not PPB, they weren't from the fire department, they weren't the first responder groups?
I don't remember seeing people, no, not at that point.
Okay.
Yeah, and unless they had like information, we wouldn't have let anybody else into the area because we had the streets blocked off also.
Okay, so anybody.
I mean, there could have been detectives in plain clothes out there. The DA, a DA or something that comes out with the homicide team.
But if there were civilians inside the crime scene tape, they would have been people that you'd identified as people who might have information.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I know this was 4 years ago, and obviously you see this sort of thing so often that must all run together. But do you have a recollection now of where that crime scene perimeter was, where the tape ran? And as you say, this OCI itself, the proper, not the administrative building, but the main student building, educational building, is a pretty big building, and that's immediately adjoining another building, is it not?
Yes,
Okay.
believe so.
And then back across Madison is this administrative building, which now is where you've got, the students have been moved.
Right.
Right. How did you set up that perimeter? How far out into Jefferson did it go? How, that's a huge space that you're trying to block off, I would think.
Well, I would say that the officers that searched the building made sure if there was any other doors that they were locked and secure. And typically on something like that, we have one way in and out, and then we secure everything. So that would have been on Madison, the way I entered. And then we had a car with crime scene tape up across 17th at Jefferson. And then I know we had a car, because it's kind of like a L shape and it dead ends into the backside of, I believe, Lincoln High School off of 17th. So then we had a car up at 18th and Madison with crime scene tape across up there blocking it. And then, I mean, there was police officers and detectives everywhere later in that whole general vicinity. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay.
It does. That's helpful. Thank you. I think that's all I have for you.
Okay.
All right, redirect.
Thank you, Your Honor. Just a couple of questions. Can you just kind of describe what the mobile command center is? So there's a better picture of that.
Yeah, so it's a big, I guess you could call it, motorhome that says Portland Police on the outside. Typically, an officer from a precinct that's been trained in it will go pick it up at whatever precinct it's at. I think we have more than one, and drive it to. It basically gets there for a large scale investigation. In this case, a homicide, and then inside there's like a room for detectives to meet. In this case, for me to be able to go in there and talk to them about everything that I did up until that point. I think there's a large whiteboard in there. So it's kind of like it's like a mobile command center kind of, and where we can all gather basically in privacy.
And so when you have kind of completed the initial stuff that you talked about, interviewed all the people, you went then on to the motorhome bus command center and explained to the detectives everything you'd done.
Correct.
And then following that explanation, later, do you also write a report?
Yes.
And does that report get directed a certain place?
It just depends on the lead investigator. Typically, it still goes to, so that kind of didn't make sense. Okay, so our report system, when you log into the precinct you're at, which would be Central. So you would typically send it to Central, and then your supervisors read it and approve it. Sometimes you can change where it goes. Like if, in this case, homicide detectives were like, send it directly to us, you could do that as well.
So you're briefing detectives at the scene on everything you've learned and then also putting it in a report that they can review later.
Right.
And as part of that briefing, you talked a little bit about getting phone numbers and contact information from Mr. Wilkie. Would you have given all of that to the police or to the detectives at that time?
Yes.
So you go through, and is that what the whiteboard is used for? Sometimes?
Sometimes, yeah.
Writing phone numbers and other things
Yeah,
like
and
that.
names, witnesses, victim, potential suspect, things like that.
All right. And then you exited the mobile command center into the outdoors.
Right.
And that's where Mr. Wilkie eventually found you.
Yes.
Okay. If I told you that the CAD call announcing Ms. Brophy's arrival was at 10:32, what would that mean to you? Would you have radioed that she was there or notified someone?
Maybe. It just depends. I mean, potentially, because communication from the officer that's at 17th and Jefferson, it's possible that I said it over the air that the victim's wife is arriving, Nancy, and she can come in as I was walking there.
But someone was notified, I assume, to let detectives know that she was present and to come talk to her.
Yes.
And I think you sort of answered this earlier, but why did you give Ms. Brophy a hug?
Because I knew that her husband had just been murdered, and she arrived and started crying, and I felt like sad. I mean, compassion. Like, I mean, it's not the first time I've hugged somebody during this job, and I mean, I've cried on this job before in uniform multiple times. Not at this thing, but it's just a way to show people that like we're here and we care.
And at the time that you were briefing the detectives that morning, did you provide to them a potential suspect or any information regarding a suspect at that time?
No, we had no idea who a suspect would be.
Thank you. That's all the questions I have.
All right. May this witness be excused?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, you can be excused. And we are going to take our lunch break a little early with the plan of being back on the record at 1:30 for the attorneys. Ms. Liu will talk to the jury about when you should be back, but we'll be in our lunch recess.
Okay. We will go off the record and we will go into recess. All rise.